So this is Algebra 1, Task 3. The first thing we're going to do is just look back at ordering real numbers. Actually, I've just got some integers here, and I want you to compare the integers using the number line, just as a refresher, because sometimes this can be challenging. So let's take a look at -7 and -4. -7 is to the left of -4, so that means it's less than -4. So this is just a refresher, it should be review. Take a look at 3 and -8. Well, 3 is to the right of -8, so 3 is greater than -8. So now we're looking at the opposite of a real number. This is a definition. If two numbers are on opposite sides of 0 but the same distance from 0, they're called opposites. So for example, -7 and 7. Negative square root of 4, which is of course -2. What's the opposite of that? Positive 2, or positive square root of 4. What's the opposite of 8? -8. Okay, and again, when there's a you try, go ahead, hit pause, and then you can hit play again when you want to know the answer. Okay, finding the absolute value of a real number. This is another definition. The absolute value is a distance of the number inside the absolute value signs from 0, and a distance is always positive. So what the absolute value bars do is turn whatever's inside positive. So the absolute value of -5 is the distance between -5 and 0. So it's 5. What's the absolute value of -√6? Well, that would be positive square root of 6. What's the absolute value of 4? It's simply 4, because 4 is 4 units from 0. And -5 was my example, so that shouldn't be too difficult. Okay. Adding real numbers. If two real numbers have the same sign, then all you have to do is add their absolute values, and the result will have the same sign as the original numbers. If they have different signs, you're going to take the absolute value of both numbers, subtract the smaller from the larger, and then whichever was larger in absolute value to begin with, that's the sign you use for the result. It's easier to see this when we actually put it into practice. So here we have two with different signs. The absolute values of these numbers are 3.5 and 1.5. We're going to subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger absolute value. That gives us 2.0. The larger absolute value is 3.5. It's positive, so our result is positive. So 2 is our answer. Okay, these two numbers have the same sign, so we're going to add their absolute values. 12 plus 52 is 64, but the answer has to be negative because the sign on both of our numbers was negative, so our answer is -64. Okay, now we have different signs. Now in this case, the negative is the larger, so our answer is going to be negative, but we're still subtracting the smaller absolute value from the larger. So we get 3.8, and our answer is a -3.8 because the larger number is, or the larger absolute value is negative. Okay. Now you do the you try. Remember, you're going to pause and try this, and then you'll come back and see if it matches my answer. First thing I'm going to do is change 2/5 into 4/10. So we have -3 and 4/10 plus -1 and 3/10. Well, they have the same sign, so I'm just going to combine the two absolute values. That gives me 4 and 7/10. And since they're both negative, the sign of the answer is going to be negative. All right, now we're going to subtract real numbers. Now, the nice thing about subtraction is it's really just addition, because when we subtract a real number, all we have to do is add its opposite. So 6 minus 7 is the same thing as 6 plus negative 7. So we can turn all of these into addition problems. And we can go back and use our rules from the other page. I'll put them over here, our rules. So if we're adding two numbers with different signs, remember we subtract the smaller absolute value. That gives us 1. The larger absolute value had a negative, so our answer is negative 1. Here, 3 minus a negative 5. If we add the opposite, well, the opposite is positive 5, so that's just 8. Same with this one, we're going to add the opposite. That means this becomes plus a positive 2/9. So this is 1/3 plus 2/9. Well, that equals 3/9 plus 2/9, which is 5/9. Now, go ahead and pause and try the U-try. All right, so this is negative 1.4 plus the opposite of negative 0.6, so it's plus 0.6. They're different signs, so we're going to subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger absolute value. That gives us 0.8. The answer must have a negative because the larger absolute value was the negative. Okay, that's a lot of practice. Make sure you use this method in your homework so that you're practicing, you're continuing to practice. Now, finding the change in temperature or elevation, the key here is to subtract the starting value from the ending value. So if we're changing from 4.8 Fahrenheit to negative 12.6 degrees Fahrenheit, our starting value is the 4.8, our ending value is the negative 12.6. So we're subtracting the starting value from the ending value. So that's negative 12.6 minus 4.8. We can turn this into an addition problem, negative 12.6 plus a negative 4.8, and then we can add the two absolute values, 4.8 and 12.6. That gives us 17.4. And our original absolute values were negative, so our change in temperature is a negative 17.4. Now, as with all word problems, a good question to ask is, does this make sense? Well, yes, if we're dropping in temperature from a positive 4.8 to a negative 12.6, if you draw a picture and you have a thermometer, here's 0, here's negative 12.6, here's 4.8. We're going to be adding these values together, and the change is negative because an increase is a positive change and a decrease is a negative change. So this should all make intuitive sense to you. Okay, now find the change in elevation. If it helps to draw a picture, looks like we're in a canyon. We're going from negative 300 to negative 100 feet below sea level. Okay? Now, remember, we're subtracting our starting value from our ending value. Our starting value is negative 300. Our ending value is negative 100. So it's negative 100 minus negative 300. Okay? If we add the opposite, this is negative 100 plus positive 300. Different signs, I'm going to subtract the smaller absolute value from the greater. 300 minus 100 is 200. The sign is going to be the same as the larger absolute value, so the change is 200 feet. And up here I did not write degrees, Fahrenheit. Okay, so we've increased, and so it's a positive change. So that makes sense. Okay, now do the U-try, pause, and then come back and check your answer with me. Okay, so here's our starting temperature, here's our ending temperature. We're going to subtract the starting value from the ending value, so 0.5 minus negative 5.5. minus, when we subtract, we add the opposite, so we're going to add a positive 5.5. 0.5 plus 5.